Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm thankful for the invitation. When I was thinking about what I was going to say, I assumed, and it was a good assumption, that our two publisher representatives, Chris, who I know very well, and Suzanne, who I met more recently, would do excellent jobs. They have a great deal of expertise and experience in dealing with misconduct in publication ethics. So I tried to think of a complementary and different perspective that I could take on this. And so I looked to my own experience, and my own experience is that I lived my adult life in the academy, in the university. And throughout that period, I was a researcher and a teacher and an author. I published my own research. I was a full professor for the last 30 years. But I also was an administrator. And so I was first a director of a research center, and then a dean of a faculty of arts and science, and then a VP academic and provost, and then a president and vice chancellor. Sometimes in your universities, you call them chancellors. They have different terms, but basically the senior position that is supposed to be the head of the institution. At the same time, I've been an editor throughout my career from early days. And I was a founder and a co-founder of 3 journals. And my first editorial experience was with an independent Canadian journal, a bilingual French and English interdisciplinary journal of women's studies. And I was a young feminist, and we did everything ourselves. We got the peer review done. We did the layout. We took it to the printer. These were really early days. Since then, I've dealt with very large academic commercial publishers. And so all of that kind of work has been taken away from me. Currently, I edit an interdisciplinary international peer-reviewed journal. And I also am an editor of a book series and of an encyclopedia. So editing has been part of my career from the fairly early days. So in trying to think about what I would speak about, I have a disclaimer on there. There's only one thing I'm going to say that is not the received wisdom of COPE. And I'm very careful when I'm speaking as the COPE chair or as a COPE representative, that I present COPE's position and opinion, received opinion on everything. I'm expressing in one slide a personal opinion, so I distinguish between my own opinion and the received opinion of COPE. So what I decided to do is talk about 4 silos. And there are 4 silos in publishing. And I think they're a structural problem that we have to solve. And I don't think I'm unique in understanding this. There's the world of journals and monograph book-length manuscripts and publishers and editors. And that is one silo. There are faculty within universities who are the authors, and they do the research. And they have to now obey by research integrity rules because governments have imposed these structures where you have to take courses and ensure that you're operating within the codes and the ethical framework of university. There are also editors of journals within university, but the university generally doesn't have a role. Even where universities have scholarly presses of their own, like Cambridge University Press or Oxford or wherever, they tend to be very independent from the university proper. And the last group is university itself. And when I say university itself, I'm talking about the leadership that actually manages the university, is responsible for the budget, is responsible for human resources and labor issues, is responsible for students and faculty and the larger community and fundraising and all that kind of stuff. So that I call the university because it's the corporate face of the university. So I'm going to talk about the university perspective, the faculty author perspective, and finally the editor perspective. And I think there are solutions that we're moving forward to get all these 4 groups, 3 of which I'm talking about today, communicating in a way that would better serve research ethics and publication ethics. And I should say that I think I know who you are, people listening today, and I have chaired an IRB, and I have been a member of an animal care committee that approved the ethical treatment of animals in research. So I think I know the group to whom I'm speaking. Okay, so if I could have the next slide. The university's perspective, as I noted, is, and I'm not going to read all of the text. I've got it there so you have a complete record of what I was trying to express, but I don't read all my, I usually do fairly word intense presentations, but I do that so you have a record. So the senior university administration, the university's perspective, are those folks with full-time jobs to lead and manage the university. And if you ask what they know about publication ethics, I would say very little. If you look at procedures and policies for publication ethics, and I've looked many, many times for many, many research projects at many, many universities, and they're almost entirely silent about publication ethics. I did it again about a week ago in anticipation of this talk, and the one exception I found was Yale University, which has clear guidelines, although they're limited to issues of authorship, research funding, and financial conflict of interest. So what do they know about research ethics, or as many issues of publication ethics begin at the research stage? Well, many universities in many different countries have extensive guidance and procedures for approving research ethics with significant detail about numerous potential ethical pitfalls. Next slide, please. And that's essentially because governments have imposed them. I don't say this that universities were bad, but universities focused on faculty evaluations of students many, many years before they ever focused on research. Research is one of the things many universities say you should be doing 40, 40, 20 as a faculty member. 40% of your time should be in teaching, 40% of your time should be in research, and 20% of your time should be serving the university in committee work and serving your profession. But for many universities, research was the domain of faculty, and it was an independent and autonomous project that universities didn't want to impinge upon. So they left universities' researchers to do their own thing, and they only looked at the product. The product was evaluated in terms of productivity. So when you went up for tenure or promotion, permanent employment, and status, people looked at the outcome. They looked at the grants that you got, and then they looked at the outcome into your publications. But you were pretty much independent in terms of the process of your research. So that's still largely the case, that research standards were imposed on universities by governments in the last 25 years because governments became a little more right-wing. There's, as people call it, the neoliberal global movement. And so taxpayers became much more interested in how government taxpayer dollars or taxpayer dollars managed by the government were given to universities. And there were a number of scandals of extreme issues with usually with human participant research where there wasn't voluntary informed consent, and people were abused, and people were not informed about what was really going on. So there's a lot of standards about research ethics. There's very, very little understanding, I think, about publication ethics. Next slide. Okay, this strange disconnect. And I found it strange all of my career because I was an editor. Universities care about research productivity and research grants and dollars. They abide by detailed guidelines and procedures for ethical conduct of research. The business of research ethics is generally made up of 3 stages: the acquisition of funding, the conduct of the research, and the dissemination of the research largely through scholarly publications. And it's this latter situation that generally is not reflected as an interest within the university. People don't people who tenure, who deal with tenure and promotion, who are usually senior administrators, where they decide whether they're going to accept recommendations or not, know very little about publication and publication ethics. So why are universities disengaged from the publication process? Next slide, please. And I put this in here because it was one of the few studies I could find. I kept looking for, and I've done this many times, and I kept looking for the role of senior administration in being concerned about research ethics and publication ethics. And there's a new position in many universities. This is a United States study, and it was published in December 2020. So it's one of the few research on administrators that I've ever seen. And what they did was, in this United States study, is they interviewed 44 United States senior research officers, and they're usually VPs research or vice president research. It's a fairly senior role. They asked them about their jobs, and the people responding, the 44 people subjects, variously described their jobs as promoting granting success, facilitating funding opportunities, compliance, and research competitiveness. Next slide, please. So there was only one mention of ethical and societal values in the entire study, and that appeared as a problem, that there was increasing external imposition of the universities to be concerned with ethical and societal values. And presumably, when they talked about what they responded to in terms of compliance, maybe dealt with research ethics, but there was absolutely no mention of publication ethics. Next slide, please. So the issues arising from the disconnect. There's no established relationship between universities, editors, and publishers. When an editor finds something serious that leads them to believe that significant misconduct occurred in the research, the practice generally is to contact the university. First, you contact the author, generally speaking, and you ask them to explain what this problem is in a way that's satisfactory. But if you think it's sufficiently problematic, the editor then generally contacts the university and says, we have this allegation, we have this problem and issue, we think you should do an investigation. So the investigation then, from the perspective of the editor, frequently enters a black box. Whatever the university is doing or not doing frequently is not communicated back to the editor. And sometimes the editor has published an expression of concern, saying there's a worry here because they don't think they have sufficient evidence to actually retract the article, and they're waiting for the outcome of the investigation, but the university doesn't get back to them, and the university actually doesn't respond at all to written inquiries or phone calls. Now, having been in these roles, I quite understand the university's position. The university's position is in a unionized context, they have a faculty union to deal with. In most universities, they have terms of employment, and they have to protect the confidentiality of the person against whom the allegation is made. They have to respect the principles of natural justice, that people have a right to be heard, and people have a right to hear what the allegation is against them. So universities, in an abundance of caution, often just clamp up and keep to themselves and don't communicate because they don't want to share that information. Now, interestingly, when Cope was describing this in presentations made to universities, the universities had their own complaints, and they said that frequently, when they thought an article should be retracted, they approached the journal editor in question, and they got a lack of responsiveness. They just didn't get responses. So let's look at some first steps to a solution. Next slide, please. So Cope has been thinking about this a great deal, and our editors and our publishers have spoken about this for many years. And what Cope decided a few years ago was that we need to bring together editors, publishers, and universities as members in a dialogue with a commitment to working together with a shared vision of research integrity and publication ethics. So a few years ago, we did a feasibility study and a pilot project with 6 international universities. And the universities themselves told us that the lack of knowledge about publication practices and publication ethics was a serious issue for them. So COPE has recently awarded an RFP contract to Cambridge University Press to develop COPE's first university deliverable, an online course on publication ethics. And this was identified as a first priority by universities and initially targeted at research integrity officers. Now, Chris was at a conference that I presented at a few years ago. We went to 2 conferences, actually. We went to a senior university conference at Ohio State University. And the next day we went to a meeting of the American Research Integrity Officers. And throughout those 2 days, the message was consistent. They wanted help, and they wanted help in publication ethics. So we didn't decide to do this. We decided that this was our first deliverable as a response to the issue as identified by the universities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my second group. So the first one was about universities and their issues with respect to publication ethics. The second is the faculty themselves. And the faculty are the authors, they're the researchers. They create or discover, and depending on your discipline, you either think you're creating something or you're discovering it. They create or discover the research that gets disseminated in publications. Only a small number of faculty serve as editors in journals. There's a minority in every university, so it isn't something that is common to a university where people can talk to all the editors in their universities. There's a small minority of people who do this. There's a larger number of editorial board members, but there's still a minority, and there's a much larger group of peer reviewers. And some faculty, and I've experienced both of these things, think that the university administration know nothing about students and faculty, nor do they know anything about the purpose of a university. They're just these crummy administrators you have to deal with. And there are many books by faculty, many that I've read, asserting this. And some faculty also think that editors are corrupt and that they're gatekeepers, they're biased, they're self-interested, and they're filled with various forms of conflict of interest. For example, even if it is blind review, the editor knows who the author is and how to select peer reviewers who will reject their articles. Although why you would want to do this mystifies me. But it's true. Both of these things are true. Now, some faculty know a fair bit about publishing, and some believe they do because they read articles and they publish their research in articles, but they actually know very little about publishing. And the ones that know very little about the process often don't choose wisely. They either submit to a journal outside the scope of their research, I get a fair number of those, or they submit to predatory publishers with all the problems of that. Next slide. Now, the value to faculty and to research, the education ethics is clearly faculty are central to the production of new knowledge. And access to education about publication ethics is key to addressing the spectrum of ethical issues that arise from research and publication. As we all know, a lot of the problems in publication ethics occur during the research. And one of the most common ones is authorship. So people don't discuss authorship. They don't discuss who's going to be is the principal investigator the first author or the last author, because in some cultures, the last author is the more important one, and the first is. Is everyone going to be an author? Some really quite contentious complaints that COPE has had over the years is PhD students who thought they were authors and then found they were either not acknowledged in the work they were doing on the research that they were participating in. They either aren't even acknowledged or they're not authors and they expected to be. Next slide. Okay, academic editors' roles vis-a-vis the university. As I said, only a minority of faculty ever serve as journal editors, and it's very difficult to get the global data on the breakdown. I've looked many, many times. There's a lot of data on demographic information about editors, and so I'll give you a few of those. Next slide. This is all about the underrepresentation of women as editorial board members, and as peer reviewers. Next slide. So you can check that out if you want. And this is about bias. So in a review from 2017, Tompkins, Zhang, and Hedlund, in conference presentations that were single blind versus double blind review, they found that reviewer rate appears with famous authors or authors from prestigious institution to be much more high. Next slide, please. Okay, further on the editor's perspective, people have to realize that editors are very, very different. There are professional editors. There's full-time professional editors that are either seconded or hired full-time from faculty. That's a typo, so it's from faculty who, sorry, misreading my own. It ranges from full-time professional editors, and they're usually in the biomedical or the science fields, to faculty who edit off the side of their desk after teaching, research, and committee work is done. And I'm one of the latter, because mostly editors in the humanities and social science fall into this category of people who do this in addition to everything they're supposed to do first, which is their teaching and their research and their committee work and their service to the profession. So editors of humanities and social science journals, we usually get a small honorarium from the publisher. Some people try to negotiate with their university to get a course relief, thinking that the journal is going to be prestige to the university, so that the dean will be generous and give them a relief from one of their teaching courses, or give them more money. In most cases, neither is the case, although it's ad hoc and individual. I found an explicit policy at Notre Dame University that says that there'll be no further emoluments besides what the editor receives as an honorarium from the publisher. Next slide. Okay, so 3 of the 4 journals that I've edited, as I noted, were with large academic commercial publishers, and all of them were members of COPE at the initiation of my publisher. As an editor-in-chief, my role is the integrity of the content of the articles that are accepted and the due diligence of following the practice of double-blind review by specialists in the area. My journals have all been double-blind review. And I guess I'm a traditionalist. I do believe I understand the value of the kind of integrated, collaborative discussion that happens where reviewers and authors know each other. But I think if you are concerned about any possible bias, this is the best practice, I think. All COPE members are asked to abide by the principles of transparency and best practices in scholarly publishing, and it is a wonderful guide, which was crafted and accepted by, I think, about 5 or more industry organizations, and it really tells you everything that you need to know about what best practices are to be followed. Next slide. There's a lack of standard of training of editors. Many publishers sign up their journals to be members of COPE. In 2 recent studies, a minority of member journal editors, and they were this was in the humanities and social sciences that COPE didn't know or were unsure that the journals they edited were members of COPE. So the source is a study on humanities and social science that you can find on the COPE website. And the American Philosophical Association did a task force on diversity with a sample of 265 journals that are association journals. And again, they found a group of COPE members that didn't know if they were COPE members at all. There's frequently no training or introduction to publication editor ethics for new editors. Next slide. So there is, I think things that are troubling to be an editor is you do it because you love it. If you're getting a minimal stipend and no relief from your other work. So I think you do it because you love it, but editors, faculty editors have minimally 3 masters. The publisher of the journal, the university that employs them, and their disciplinary or interdisciplinary scholarly community to which they belong. And this places them in a position of competing interests, and I'll return to that in a bit. Next slide. Okay, editorial commitment to publication ethics by editors. There may be bad apples, but most editors are also successful scholars who publish in peer-reviewed journals and peer-reviewed monographs. They're committed to research and publication integrity. So the majority don't do bad things, they do very good things. And I'm sure for most newbies, new editors, the discovery of the range of violations both is it's startling and upsetting and unsettling, and it's unpleasant and it's shocking. So I think most of us have that experience. Many traditional editors traditionally have contracts that stipulate they have autonomy over the scholarly content of the material published in the journal, which Suzanne referenced. Next slide. And here's my one opinion, which is not Cope's, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. My opinion is that editors are increasingly, it's a lot less fun than it used to be. They have an increasingly high level of responsibility and accountability in an environment where publishers are very risk averse. And they're risk averse for very good reasons, because there's blogsters and trollers and journalists who have great appetite for publicizing any serious error in publication ethics, any serious misconduct. But I think that there's more significant pressure put on editors-in-chief with a diminishing editorial independence. And it makes the job far less pleasant and far less rewarding. That's my opinion. Next slide. Okay, this is my final point. Universities are, there's endemic and inherent conflict of interest in universities. There's peer review of colleagues for promotion and status. And there has to be, well, everyone tries to be good, but there's implicit quid pro quo, because one year you're going up for promotion, the previous year your colleague was. And administrators are often faculty who will return to faculty. So it's embedded in universities that there's conflict of interest. With administration, there can be 2 forms: that you're worried about your own reputation when there's something that wrongdoing that's going to harm the reputation of the university. You may have a worry about your own reputation. You may have a worry about the university's reputation, which is more like a conflict of commitment than a conflict of interest. Faculty can commit acts of misconduct in order to promote the advancement of themselves at the cost of truth and integrity. And editors can strongly identify with the journal they edit and not want to engage in the exposure of misconduct in publications that may harm the reputation of their journal, or they may do the same thing to protect themselves. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Brilliant, Deborah. Thank you so much. That was fascinating.